Good evening, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for attending. And I know the poorest guy here of attendance is Raf. I think it's like 5 a.m. in the morning. Sorry for that, everyone. And in the beginning, I would like to apologize for the absence of Dr. Yazan. Dr. Yazan has an unfortunate sudden death in the family. That's why he has apologized just lately today. So please accept our apologies for his absence today. As today we're discussing the future of work, and here in the future of work is a huge title. That title, frankly, when I saw the bio of everyone, I started to get goosebumps. Where shall I start? After years and years and years of experience of whether moderating or presenting or attending conferences, this is a chilling kind of topic because it covers not only academically or research-wise or practically, but it covers a current pandemic that no one has ever planned for, and yet we need to plan for the next, the impact of the results of this pandemic for the next maybe few years, even after it disappears. So therefore, I try to make this kind of moderation today to give each one like a couple of minutes, and I'll start now with the first question. One of the features or of the issues or future of work are inequalities. Inequalities, this is a term that we have been hearing in the past maybe 30 years, 50 years, but still a very serious issue. And therefore, we would like to ask the panelists today, and start with Abigail. What do you think of inequalities and the next upcoming future of work as you see?
Terrific. Well, first and foremost, it's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually. And it's an honor to speak among these other panelists and with the moderator, and in this very important time of so much change. And I think one thing we know for certain is the only certainty that we have is things will change. And I would say over the past, there's been an inequality of skills and access to education. And that has held a lot of people back and created much more inequality. What I think about the future of work is that people who have more compassion, more emotional intelligence, will be able to thrive more. The skills will be able to be replaced by machines, and we're already seeing that with a lot of jobs. Anything that you can do with a computer can be replaced. But when you think about the jobs of the future, it's going to relate to taking care of people. It's going to relate to nurses, it's going to relate to childcare, it's going to relate to elder care. And that can't be replaced by a machine or by a robot. So for the future of work and to reduce income inequality, we need to think about helping today's students, today's workers, and the future leaders to learn more about their own emotional management, to be more compassionate toward others, to anticipate people's needs. And that's from customer service, that's from care of other people. And that is the way that we will have a more humane society that reduces inequality of opportunity, but it will also reduce income inequality, because this is something that everybody can do. They can be more caring, they can be better at customer service, they can be in a service position where empathy creates wealth and skills.
Very good. I'll move now to Raf. Raf, what do you think about inequalities from your, for example, expertise or paradigm that you have been seeing in the past and you expect to see in the future?
Yeah, first of all, kia ora from New Zealand, where it is 5 o'clock in the morning. And thanks everyone for being part of this. I really like what you said, Abigail, in terms of that concept of care, and one of the issues around, for me, work and income is really what we value. And one of the problems that we're facing around the inequality question is the returns to capital over the returns to income. And to give you a very easy example, say in the US, where The minimum wage has been, I think, $7.25, has remained at that level for some time, whereas the wealth of someone like Jeff Bezos at Amazon has gone from 200 million to 200 billion. Now, he hasn't actually really done anything to make that happen in terms of working. He just happens to own a lot of stock in an asset that has increased in value. So challenges we've got, we know the technology arguments around changing work. We know that a lot of jobs will disappear. We know that some new jobs will be created. But what we have a problem is that capital basically doesn't care about people. It's simply just an extractive notion. So if you own capital, well, actually, you might think I prefer to have some kind of technological response than employ people. So we will start to see rising unemployment. We've already seen probably the last 10 years the impacts of the global financial crisis in 2008, where a lot of the industries, a lot of the employment has not come back and has been replaced by new technology. So the inequality is likely to increase. And that's problematic from a societal perspective, because that creates a lot of people who don't have, access to services. And we see that inequality through also the provision of public services at the state level. Some countries are better than others, but those countries that have really over the last 30 years followed that more neoliberal paradigm of reducing government services, that also adds to the inequalities. You get sort of a public inequality and a private inequality. And I mean, that is a huge challenge for us to address.
All right. What about Nicholas? What do you think from that paradigm, as Abigail and Raf stated? What do you have a different notion about the inequalities?
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, I 100% agree with what they are talking of, and I do believe that technological innovations also will be a important factor in terms of a lot of employment loss. Let's say you talk of artificial intelligence coming into the picture, you talk of robots coming into the picture. So obviously, that definitely leads to a lot of unemployment opportunities. Also, apart from that, I feel that the gender inequality is also a main reason why there is a, let's say, income gap between different genders in different countries. There are definitely personal factors, globalizations, but yeah, I think Abigail and Raf both summarized in a beautiful way, and I definitely agree to those points, which are the key reasons of the current gap.
Very good. You just brushed over inequality of gender. I always had that notion of, and gender inequalities never take place in, for example, medical careers, because they don't care about gender, male or female. They care about the professionality and the capabilities of the person and the qualities. As well as, let's say, jobs like, for example, computer coding and programming. They never care about gender, but they care about the productivity. However, in service jobs, they do care, and also in leadership positions, they do care. And the glass ceiling is always there, as well as the payment is always different. Where do you see that? I'll start with you, Abigail, because I see you nodding. I'll start with you. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up this question, because I think there are multiple components to this. First is that intelligence is equally distributed among genders. So the things that are behind the scenes where a certain gender bias can't be revealed, like you said, computer technicians or computer programmers, women and men are likely to be equally selected, but sometimes the income that they get or the salary they get might not be equal. Men might be paid more than women. Another component, this is very timely, is during COVID, people are working from home. And a lot of my friends who are executives, who are doctors, who have the professions that are very demanding of their time are experiencing COVID very differently, because they're working from home. They might not be able to have the same childcare support because their children are not going to school or not participating in after-school programs. So they are finding it difficult to juggle family responsibilities and work responsibilities. So COVID is both an opportunity this pandemic is an opportunity for us to level the playing field in terms of gender roles. And my husband and I are co-creators of So Creates. We're co-creators of our family, and we equally share the responsibility. But it takes a lot of conversation about who's going to do what and how we make sure we support each other. So many people are having these conversations with their spouses and with their families, and that is where those conversations are happening. Gender equality is improving. Where it's not happening, gender inequality is increasing. Gender equality is not improving. So this is a really important time for us to address gender equality in terms of roles and responsibilities. Otherwise, more women will drop out of the workforce. It's also a great opportunity for companies to say, who is more productive? Let's compensate them equally, regardless of their gender. Because if we're not coming into the office, if we're not giving as much physical appearance and face time, we don't know who the gender is. We just know the name. So this is a time where we can say, technically, should we compensate these two people equally because they are performing the same responsibilities, they're equally productive, they're doing, they deserve the same compensation. So from an income inequality perspective and from a roles and responsibility perspective, we can use this pandemic to do a lot more for gender equality. So I'll pause there. I'm really interested to hear from Raf and Nicholas about this topic too.
Yes, there you go. I'll start with Nick. What do you think, Nick, about this topic? And we can add to this inequality as well. Also, gender bias, besides gender biases, also as well as color biases or accent biases. I've seen that myself. I've lived it in the U.S. for almost 15 years. I had to brush my way in. Otherwise, they will immediately put aside because you don't speak you're not a native speaker of English as Americans, for example. So what do you think, Nick?
Yeah. 100%, I agree over what you're talking of, and in fact, I have read some articles with I would say authorized sources where it says that women in states, even though are having the same qualification as men, but they earn 49 cents per $1 against a man. So these are all statistics which proves that this has always been existed. I feel that a lot of other reasons are also there. So I hail from India. So if I were to tell you other stuff like I would say lack of education. From countries like India, where we feel that, okay, women are not allowed to get educated to a certain extent. They don't get the equal opportunity at workplace. So all these reasons obviously accumulate to the overall gender biasness. When you talk of racism, I would say, yes, that's skin color differentiation has been a very prominent, let's say, problem in the overall industry perspective. And I'm sure there are certain industries which stick to the norms of not recruiting XYZ skin color. So yes, I feel the bigger problem lies with the fact that when organizations believe in the fact that they should give, and as Abigail mentioned, that it should be based on the performance and not on the gender, where as to what are the outcomes you're providing given a task, that should be the criteria for measuring what kind of benefits you should get rather than just the gender or just other stuff. So yeah, that's my broad opinion, but I think Abigail has drafted it really well for me to add on, but this is what I feel.
Raf, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things here, but I'll address the pay equity one first, because that is a huge issue. And I mean, it's something in New Zealand that has been a strong theme of the previous government, which is to really look at that quite closely. And the gap has closed quite considerably. But we find even in high-level executive positions, women, senior executives, chief executives, they still tend to get paid less. And that's, I mean, there are structural reasons there. As Nicholas said, there's structural inequalities around pay, which are related to gender and gender bias. But I think also, men tend to overestimate their worth, and women tend to underestimate theirs and don't ask. But we need to be very clear. And it's the same as you mentioned with accents and names, that we try and take the bias out of recruitment processes, of the way that we approach people in the employment sphere, to actually say, well, can you do this job? And there are some professions, yes, it's really they're gender blind. It's who's the best person to do the job, and everyone gets paid the same, and we need to sort of go to that. But one area that I think goes back to what Abigail was talking about at the beginning, is the value of care, the value of what we call unpaid labor in the economy. So, studies show that there's about 25% of GDP, and this was a study done in Australia last year, and it's generally applicable to most developed countries. 25% of GDP is actually unpaid labor. Now, this is work in the home, and as Abigail said, with COVID, a lot of people are actually having to do work at home, which is homework and also business work. A lot of that work is caring, it's domestic chores, cooking, cleaning, looking after the community, getting kids to and from school, doing the homework. And when you add it up, it adds up to quite a lot of money, but it's not recognized as work, and therefore it's not valued monetarily. But obviously the contribution is huge, and what we're starting to see as an impact of COVID, because it's really created those stresses, is that people do an awful lot of work which is not regarded as valuable and therefore not paid, and this is highly problematic. And when you add to that as well a lot of what we call essential workers who have supported their communities and economies through COVID, again, a lot of those have been lower paid jobs or tasks which have not been considered that important, but now they're very important. So obviously, testing stations, supermarket workers, quarantine workers, suddenly these are the essential services. But as soon as we go back to a normal economy, we ignore them, and we go back to putting them on minimum wage. So a sort of sense of what is valuable and therefore what we ascribe money to through income is something that really needs to change. And the gender piece of that is really important. And I think one of the outcomes of COVID for people all over the world, regardless of what country you're in, is that it's starting to change our understanding of what we value, the understanding of the economy and how it works and the results that it produces, which unfortunately are unequal in lots of different ways. And I think the gender piece of that is really important, and this is a great time to have that conversation.
Very good. Well drafted. Thank you very much. And I think I will go forward because I thought I heard someone mentioning AI. And I feel it's been discussed almost all in many discussions and panels today. I was reading an article by MIT. It said prior to 2018, we were never expecting certain jobs will never disappear in the world. For example, truck drivers, and there are 1.5 million truck drivers in the U.S. and who will never disappear out of the surface. And they said after 2018, AI will immediately replace slowly, and almost in a few years, like 20 years, whatever, AI will replace the truck drivers almost to more than 50%. What do you think about the jobs that AI will be affected, and how do we deal with that? I'll start with Nicholas.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So since I'm coming from an industry which is known for technological innovation in HTC, so there are a lot of stuffs we are doing in terms of VR, AI, AR. And yes, I do believe to a certain extent that yes, a lot of jobs might be cannibalized and lost. But at the same time, I still believe that there will be a lot of new business opportunities which will open up, which will kind of offset the job loss. So to give you an understanding, there are certain section of jobs which can never be touched, which is related to, let's say, the emotional quotient, because at the end of the day, AI is more to do with machine learning. They can do a job which has been prescribed to them. But when it comes to the emotional touch of it, definitely that is something which still require a human presence. So yes, what I believe is what you mentioned is true, where we are talking of your driverless car, driverless truck. Yes, to a certain extent, AI will take over. But at the same time, I feel that this will also help us in terms of using technology and creating new business opportunities or new job, which will also help in new employment opportunities moving ahead.
Abigail?
Yes. So I believe, as I mentioned in the beginning, that change is inevitable. And the only thing we can do is flow with that change. And so if AI is taking over certain jobs, let's let AI take over those jobs, because that will free up time for individuals. So for example, instead of workers having to work 50 hours a week, they can work 25 hours a week, get higher hourly rate, and then be able to spend more time at home with family and taking care of the community. And that might compensate for the 25% of GDP that Ralph mentioned is not included in actual GDP because it's informal at-home work. So I think there's a solution here that we need to understand, embrace, innovate toward, which is we don't need to work 40 to 60-hour weeks as we have been for the past few decades. And we can build in more work-life balance, more time with family, more time for care. We're on this treadmill of having to work so many hours to make a certain income to be able to afford childcare, to be able to afford retirement, to be able to afford, you know, all of these things that we outsource that sometimes we just would be better off doing ourselves or would prefer to do ourselves. And so I think the solution is right in front of us. We just need to do the research and learn how to lean into it and adapt to it so that we can have a more resilient society.
And Raf, and I've been to New Zealand, Raf, 3 times. I forgot to mention that to you before. And I see New Zealand is one of the best places for retirement for me, at least, because of so many things. They are relaxed people. They are relaxed environments. You're not pressured. They're like by the seconds you run around things and errands to finish. But at the same time, they're professional and industrial and providing all services. So where do you see, for example, AI taking over the jobs in New Zealand or across the world that you have been working with?
Yeah, I mean, I like what both Abigail and Nicholas are saying. I mean, this is the big conversation about work. It's technology. What impact is it going to have? Will we lose 2 billion jobs by 2030? We don't know. But I think the key thing is, as Abigail says, is it forces us to think about the purpose of work. What are we running around doing all this stuff for? As you say, to afford childcare, to afford this, to afford to pay for your funeral. In some cases, it seems crazy. So it's you know, we have to understand we have been living through, you know, a big economic cycle from the mid-'80s. You know, the opening of financial markets, globalization, leveraging of capital, and it has produced some positive outcomes, but it also has produced a lot of negative outcomes. And so the technological change, which is never going to stop, so we have to, you know, we have to sort of embrace it, and we have to embrace it positively. But it will force us to rethink the capital approach to how we deal with those people who don't have work. I mean, for me, a universal basic income is definitely an answer that we should consider in terms of providing people with an adequate standard of living. But also we have to deal with issues like a digital divide. So to give you 2 examples in New Zealand, in the banking and finance sector, you know, AI and the ability to come online and chat to a machine learning AI avatar character to deal with some basic questions, whether you're getting insurance or a mortgage, is great. But also for a lot of older people, they can't do that. They don't have the ability to access the internet in the way that the majority of people do. They come from a time where they would go to their local bank and put a check or pay a bill by a check, and it's very challenging. So a lot of them are being left behind. A lot of rural communities are seeing services being hollowed out as banks withdraw, because banks realize actually they don't need to spend all the money by having places open where they don't have a great deal of custom anymore. And everything is starting to become centralized, and technology is being used a lot more. So that how we deal with that digital divide in terms of service provision is quite important. And there are ways around that. I mean, local government and local councils can start to consolidate services as well, so people still have somewhere to go. Another thing in New Zealand that was brought in 2019 was the world's first well-being budget. So the government, when it produced its budget in 2019, it put a well-being lens around this. So when ministers go for budget bids, they actually have to show, well, what is the outcome of this expenditure going to be? It's not just, I want to build some roads, or I want to put money into defense, or I want to build some pipes, or I want to build some new schools. This is all bread and butter stuff. But actually, what positive outcomes are going to come from that? So it's trying to look at the way government spends money as well to have positive outcomes for the community. So we're trying to connect, in some respects, the work bit, which is running around trying to earn money to live and to survive, to actually, well, what is the purpose of all this work? What is the purpose of society? What are we trying to achieve? So we're at sort of, I think, the beginning of a considerable shift. And I think that's why we use the term acceleration, because we have acceleration of technology at the same time as we have acceleration of social changes. And that's incredibly exciting. And as Abigail says, you know, we should embrace that. But we do need to think quite carefully about the people who might get left behind if we don't pay attention to them.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And sometimes I think I'm considering myself into that zone. I'm fearing, hey, I must go back and see where I can update myself to the current, what's called trends, as you said, Raf. Now, frankly, in the past few years, I've been reading the tweets of and taking so much, paying so much attention to the tweets of World Bank as well as World Economic Forum of two issues. And I'll start with one issue. The two issues are the skills needed for the 2030 careers, and as well as what jobs are needed in the world by 2030. And I'll start with the skills, first of all, because Abigail mentioned at the beginning, pay should be paid according to the skills and according to the deliverables, not according to the gender. So besides that, what skills do you see needed, besides the technical skills, what skills do you see needed for the upcoming future workers? Putting in mind, reading an article, it said that youngsters, millennials, for example, like to hop from job to job, not caring about stability. They want to continue to explore more jobs and explore more payments. Whereas, and like 30 years ago, if you do that, you are a hopper and nobody wants to hire you anymore.
Thank you for that context and framing. And I'll say that in my 20s, I hopped from new jobs every 2 years, and I learned so much from each job, and it allowed me to give more to each employer that I transitioned to, because I learned so much and I learned so quickly, and then I was able to share that. So it helped me accelerate my career and be a more valuable employee. And then when I was in my 30s, I wanted more stability because I was thinking about family, and I expected that stability from my employer as well. So I think employers and companies need to understand that each individual and each employee has a different expectation and need, and to have that conversation up front when hiring, and not to judge or be biased. If someone wants to have a more accelerated career, get more opportunities, they'll work harder, they expect to be compensated based on performance and bonus. And others that say, I will be reliable, you can count on me for the next 5 to 10 years, and I expect that from you. And this is something that we understand in so many other parts of society, that each individual is unique, each person's expectations and needs are unique, and it needs to be more of this dynamic conversation. At the same time, societies where healthcare and unemployment the benefits are not as strong, people feel they rely a lot more on employers, and it's harder to shift jobs, and it's harder to create that job stability and income stability. So I think we need to, from an international organization level, World Bank, World Economic Forum, UN, have these conversations, but also from the large global employers, what is important to workers? Is it working remotely? Is it being able to work whatever hours you can work to achieve the result and not necessarily doing the same hours as everyone else? So I think this is my first point, is that this is a dynamic conversation between employers and employees and how the workplace is evolving. My second point around skills is that there are some people who are very good at math, very good at computer science, and they should continue to study that so that they can program the computers and advance AI, so that jobs and technology can be customized appropriately. Other people who are not as inclined toward math or computer science they shouldn't be forced to study that in high school and college. This is my personal opinion. I know many people who are extremely emotionally intelligent, but not good at math. So why force them to do math where they lower their self-esteem? And if they were able to focus on what they do best, which is emotional intelligence, they could be a great manager. They could be a great leader. And so I think we, as a society, need to do better with our education system. So they're more customized toward the student and customized toward the different verticals or sectors of society and what we need. And hopefully that will evolve over time. And it's hard for me to answer your question about what are the skills of the future. I do think that we need to invest a lot more in empathy, in helping people master their own self, in learning how to learn, because in the coming years, what will be certain is that the new jobs, the new industries, the new companies will expect people to learn at a quicker rate. So if we don't know how to learn or to be self-taught, those individuals will struggle. And so when we think about now, the elderly people are struggling with learning how to interact with automated systems, with AI, that will only be more exacerbated where when we're 50 or 60 or 70, so many changes will happen that we won't be prepared for, and the changes will accelerate. So learning how to learn, I think, is a really important skill that everyone should learn. Empathy is something that we should teach a lot more. And then we should divide up the harder skills, or what are considered harder skills: computer science, math, analytics of reading and pattern recognition, and to understand from an individual level what a student's natural proclivity is, what they're good at, and help them carve a unique path.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, obviously, to what Abigail is talking, but just to add on, so for me, I feel cognitive flexibility is something which I feel is very critical, because with the rise of your digitalization, which is going on globally, and you require to be switched on always, you need to have a thinking where you can switch in different circumstances. So I feel that's very important. Obviously, digital literacy is is one of the key factors, as we mentioned, that since most of the companies or most of the businesses are now integrating, let's say, VR, AI, and AR in workplace, so definitely you need some kind of literacy to handle those technologies. At the same time, the other point what Abigail mentioned in terms of your emotional intelligence and social intelligence, this is something which is very important. In terms of judgment and decision making, this is something which I've learned during my, let's say, work from home days, where I felt that since there is a lot of disconnect with the management, so you need to start taking decisions on your own. You need to be on it, and obviously you need to take ownership of what you're doing it. So that is definitely one of the key factors which I feel would be required. And apart from that, creativity, yes, because of the competition that we have, immense competition, I would say you need to find out creative ways of building up your business, and obviously an innovative mindset. So I feel, yeah, these are from my side. I feel one of the key things what would require moving ahead in the future.
Well drafted, Nick. Thank you. Raf?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting topic, this, because, again, if you think that the technology drivers have seen a lot of the educational strategy push into STEM subjects. So it's all about science and technology and engineering and maths. And the arts and the humanities have been somehow downgraded. But yet we find ourselves at a time where we are asking a lot of questions about the why. Why are we doing this? Or how should we be doing this? How should we be feeling about things? And there's almost that sense that, again, the capital drivers around technology are pushing us towards that kind of technical approach and technical view of the world. And the bits that actually are more important to us, which we've seen, again, through this working from home, having to be a lot closer with families or friends, is actually the feeling side, the empathy, the compassion, the kindness, the sense of purpose and what we're about. So these two things don't have to be in conflict, but we need to recognize that they're both important. So as Nicholas said, the ability to think and make decisions that are good are very important for our children. And that requires some understanding of how other people feel. So it's a feeling thing. Now, from a capital perspective, that's not particularly exciting. Capital's not interested in how you feel. It's interested in how much money you're going to return to it. So again, the sort of when we think about, let's say, the more income side of things and the things that we do during our work and every day, the ability to connect with people on that emotional level is very important. And we're starting to see it in workplaces. A lot of work practices that these days are considered outdated and not acceptable anymore are coming through. How you treat people at work is coming through. So we're going through some major changes. And the new generations, the millennials, yeah, I mean, they're not going to put up with that kind of stuff. And they sort of flip from job to job. And part of that also, we will need to make sure that we are providing, whether it's something like a universal basic income, but also universal basic services, so that people are not tied to a particular job because of, well, I mean, this is really a US thing, but, you know, healthcare. A lot of countries around the world, we have good public health systems. It's irrelevant of where you work. But in the US, it's so tied to your job. And so a lot of people will stick in a job they may not like or they may not be treated very well to access healthcare. So that needs to change. So if we're going to sort of free up our next generations to produce great outcomes for society and for themselves, we're going to have to, you know, change the way we approach these things. And I mean, what's quite interesting with our Prime Minister in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, you know, she really has promoted the themes of kindness and compassion and care. And for a lot of people, that's quite, well, men mainly, it's quite jarring. They go, well, what's a Prime Minister doing talking about that? But actually, it's very important. And it doesn't mean you don't do the basics and you don't do the basics well. But one of the responses to COVID in New Zealand was, you know, this idea of a team of 5 million. And of course, everyone's mad on rugby here, so they like that kind of thing. But it's also, you know, she would say after every press conference, you know, be kind to each other. And I think that more collaborative approach to life is going to be quite important, especially when we have some of the challenges. And it's not just the technology challenges. You know, we haven't talked about issues like climate change, resource conflicts, migration of populations. So from a human perspective, you know, we have a lot of challenges coming up, and teaching our next generations to embrace those, not just at a technical level, but at a human level, is going to be quite critical.
All right, but thank you so much, Raf. And I believe like we are towards our last question here in our panel today. And I still have like 6 other questions, but I thought which one to choose. Let me choose the best one. One of the topics 20 years ago were never on the table of any discussion of any future planning of jobs, whether globally in the World Bank or whether in World Economic Forums or whether even in a governmental planning table. Nowadays, it's becoming very like the talk of town, which is the social workers, the social work, the societal work, the people who are donating and working something for the society, even though they are getting paid, but they are also doing a favor for the society. Where do you see that, Abigail, coming up, especially when you see lines of cars looking for the donations of food and hundreds of people working for that and maybe getting maybe pennies towards where they're paying, but they're liking what they're doing and they're happy with what they're paid?
I've been thinking a lot during this conversation and listening to Raf and Nicholas, and you've asked such thoughtful questions about the future of work and the future of society. I think we need to discuss the future of economics. So I studied economics, quantitative economics, and I've come a long way since then. I became disillusioned with the way that the equations were structured. The economic growth was only a factor of labor and capital, and what Raf has referenced is the return on capital, and that's what's created the divide between the Jeff Bezos of the world and all the Amazon employees who are earning a lot less. But also when we think about labor, we're only thinking about productivity. We're not thinking about the social aspects. And everything that we can't factor into an equation becomes an externality. And so volunteering and being kind and climate change, those are all externalities. We don't take into consideration the impact of our actions on others, positive or negative. I think we need a fundamental overhaul of economics and finance, because where we are right now is a result of that. We have so many externalities in the world, a global health pandemic because our healthcare systems weren't able to keep up with the crisis. Severe effects of climate change and resource scarcity because we didn't take into consideration how our consumption patterns and investment in extractive industries have affected the environment. We haven't been able to adapt to the changing workforce because we haven't thought about the future of work early enough and anticipated all of these considerations. So I think to answer your question about the social workers or the social aspects of community is that we need to rethink what creates a vibrant society, a vibrant economy, and not just stick to the equations of the economics papers that came out of University of Chicago, MIT, and Harvard. We need to think more broadly about the non-tangible and sometimes what seems like invisible, but it's just that we don't understand the science and the math behind it. And so I don't have the answer yet of what this variable could be, but we've thrown everything into the kitchen sink of an externality without really understanding how it contributes to economic activity, individual livelihood, and well-being. And I'm really interested to hear that New Zealand created a well-being budget. And just thinking about how Nicholas is talking about creativity and innovation mindset, we need a lot more of that so that we understand how to have better livelihoods for everyone, better well-being. And one person's well-being is everyone else's well-being. When people don't have well-being within themselves, well-being within a family, they're stressed out, they're not productive workers, they're not contributing to society, crime rates go up, and so many other things fall from that. So we need to take care of each other. And being kind is not just a polite thing to do. There's an economic argument for kindness and compassion that we need to consider. So I'll pause there because I know we're running low on time.
Yes.
And I'd love to Rob and Nicholas.
Nicholas?
Yeah, sure. So I feel, and obviously I have been reading a lot, and what I've seen that the projection is that the increase in or increment in social workers demand will be around 16% by 2026. Now, having said that, also technology is also getting involved in social work. So just to give you an example, with the increase in number of, let's say, cases like mental illness, disability, let's say homelessness, obviously the demand for social workers increases. Just to give you a very good example of how we are also helping in terms of creating employment opportunities. So let's say basically an example of states again. So we are currently working on a project where basically we are helping people who have mental illness or let's say any kind of disability to help them recreate their let's say wishes in VR. So just to give an example, let's say someone has a disability where he doesn't have any limbs as of now, and his let's say goal or passion in life was to play soccer. And this is something which you can do in virtual reality, given the current situation where we have the technology to help you recreate this kind of a virtual environment where you have the entire body to work out. Now, having said that, in order to use this technology, definitely there will be an added workforce which would be required. And that's where I feel that there will be more job opportunities or more demand for social workers or frontline workers, which will be required. And I see that the projection which, let's say, states or others are coming up with is making a lot of sense. Now, having said that, the other part, what Abigail has mentioned in terms of the compensation or giving enough, let's say, support for, let's say, increasing or bringing people to join these kind of workforce is also very important to motivate. So I'm sure that the young generation, to a certain extent, let's say out of empathy, once or twice a year maybe does it, but then if someone has to do it on a permanent basis, or let's say join forces, I'm sure an adequate amount of compensation or some kind of carrot has to be there in place to motivate him to do it, let's say diligently. So that's my view, and I'm sure I'm happy to hear what Raf has in his mind. Thank you.
I think, Raf, you got a lot to say.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, obviously externalities is a huge issue, and like Abigail, I got an economics degree in the mid-80s and went into the financial markets and traded global markets for 10 years until I got to the point at which I thought there must be more to life than trying to make money. And I actually helped in the early 2000s set up a company which focused on monetizing what we called ecosystem services. It was called TrueCost, which is going quite well today. But yeah, a financial system is part of the problem. The way we allocate capital is part of the problem, but also the way we value people is problematic. I mean, if we just went and changed all the salary bands overnight, what I call rebalancing, where you brought the lower ones up and the ridiculous incomes of the high earners, you brought them down, it would actually create a much more healthy society, because ultimately what we're talking about, and as Nicholas referenced there, is what sort of quality of life do we want as people? We want to be well, and being well means all aspects of our life. And when we look at a country like the US, it looks quite unwell at the moment, and that's we're seeing that every day on our screens, a society that is not well and needs to get better, and we hope that it does get better, because that's quite important. I mean, one example from a work point of view is if we think our best brains, and some of the stuff Nicholas mentioned there about VR. I mean, there's some incredible technology and incredible brain power going in to producing great outcomes for people. What happened with our great brains in the 90s and 2000s? They all got employed by the financial markets to develop more and more esoteric models to basically edge out and arbitrage capital against each other. So our brains were going into a very small section of the work market. But imagine if that brain power was put towards other things. How do we solve these environmental solutions? How do we provide better social services for our people? How do we make life more accessible for those people with disabilities or other issues? And so it's just a realignment. And I think if we just change the settings on our finance system a little bit in terms of where we put capital, how we reward people, how we pay people for certain jobs, that might change a lot of things. So there are great opportunities there, but I think if we change our value set, if we ask ourselves the questions, what do we value? What do we really need in terms of goods and services? What type of communities do we want to live in? And again, COVID, with people stuck at home or stuck in apartment blocks, suddenly your neighbors become more important as part of your life. One of the things we saw after the earthquakes here that we had in Christchurch 10 years ago was the emergence of a group of students which became known as the Student Volunteer Army. And Abigail mentioned, the concept of volunteering, which is giving a contribution back to your society for no payment, but it has value. Now, the Student Volunteer Army went round, cleaning up silt from streets, helping people in broken homes, and they've continued to be around. And during COVID, they went out and they went shopping for people who couldn't leave their house. So, these sort of invisible pieces of the community are really important. And when we consider the future of work and income, if we change our value set, I think that will help us, because we've got the brain power to do good things. We've got people who care. And I think if we just realign our value set, then I think it's a pretty exciting future.
You are absolutely right. Thank you so much for this nicely wrapped connotation about the social work. Now we have almost, we're running out of time. To wrap up, what do they think about the topic of the future work? 1 minute. We'll start with Abigail.
Yes. So very briefly, I think we need to be open to what's changing, and as governments, as employers, as employees, as societies, come together and say, how do I need to adapt, or how can we adapt this system? Second is being more aware of the care economy, the role of empathy and caring for children, elderly, people with disabilities or people who have been out of a job. What role does that play that right now our economic system is not accounting for, but needs to account for? And then the third is that seeing AI as a way to perhaps evolve our economy quicker so that people can have more leisure time, or we can focus on the jobs that involve more creativity, more empathy, more of the human skills, and not trying to mourn the loss of jobs from AI, but saying, how does this help us become the society, the community that we've always wanted to be? So I believe that's my 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Nicholas?
Yeah, for me, I feel we will have definitely a hybrid way of working where we are talking of, let's say, remote working, sometimes meeting clients. And I think that's the new normal. As Abigail mentioned, we need to adapt, be open to the changes and adapt to the technology. Also, apart from that, I feel empathy is, yes, I agree to that part too. Empathy is one of the most important factors, which I think we need to instill in our society even more now, considering the fact that we see how many people are currently dying in these unprecedented times. And as you said, like it's a time for us to also reflect as to what exactly is the purpose, what do we want. So yes, we need to have a balance. From a technology point of view, yes, there will be machine learning, there will be cloud computing, there will be AI who will be coming in the picture and obviously taking up jobs. But I certainly believe that this gives us an opportunity also to explore new business opportunities, new ideas, be more creative, as I mentioned earlier. And lastly, as I mentioned, cognitive flexibility, I still feel is quite key, because with the competition around, you need to be switch on always. And I see a bright future ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raf.
Yeah, that's a great note to finish on, because I think we do have to be optimistic. We're coming out of a 30-year cycle where it's all been about money, it's all been about returns to capital. Labor's just been considered an input into that equation. That needs to change. I think what we've discussed today about the values of care and compassion and kindness of a new generation that is open to that has a slightly different value set, that maybe they can't afford to buy a house, so actually they're focused on other things. And seeing people as being a little bit more important than capital, I think will help us shift. And in some respects, it's about moving to a more regenerative economy rather than an extractive one, an economy that is about participation, about collaboration, about outcomes for all people, and building a healthy and fair society. And I think the future of work, if we get it right in terms of those right value sets, understand the true costs of what we're trying to do, we can do some great things. And we just have to hope that we can get on that path and be optimistic and keep working together.
Thank you, Raf. And I think we're reaching towards our end of the panel today. And I'd like to thank everyone, Abigail, Raf, Nicholas, for your inputs. And it was one of the most enriching inputs, and the contextual genres that came out could be summarized somewhere towards like a roadmap of what is the future work of the globe. Thank you so much, and looking forward to meeting you again in the future.
Thank you. Thank
Kia
you. Thank you.
Kia ora.